Welcome to the Spring Hills Podcast. My name is Garett Elliott. I'm the worship pastor here, and today we have an extremely special episode for you. A few days ago, I got the opportunity to sit down with Pastor Bret and interview him. I asked him all sorts of questions, some about his upbringing, some about being called into ministry, and about the challenges of planting a church. We even found out what his favorite sports teams are. It was a lot of fun getting to know him just a bit more, and I'm super excited to share it with you and give you the opportunity to hear a little bit more about who our pastor is and how God's worked throughout his life. But before we get to that, I want to remind each and every one of you that Spring Hills will continue to stream all of our services online. Check out springhills.org or download the free Spring Hills app for more information on when and where you can stream the services. If you miss out on the live experience, don't worry, all of our services are posted on YouTube, so you can watch them anytime you want. You can share them with your friends. You can share them with your family. Of course, you can always find the replays of Pastor Bret's messages right here on the Spring Hills Podcast feed. And now, let's check out this interview with Pastor Bret. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Garett. Thank you so much. And I wish we had a live phone-in kind of a thing, you know?
And ask me anything. That's one of the things I want to do next is put like you and Garrett Ward, because Garrett Ward's pretty famous around here too, and maybe Kiki or something, and have them have people call in or Twitter or Facebook, something like that. Put in some questions and ask me anything kind of deal, which would be fun.
But anyway, I hope that what we talk about today is encouraging and helpful for people for us to get to know each other.
Yeah. And also just for so everybody knows, we are right in the middle of Easter weekend here as we're recording this. And Easter weekend is going to be great to be part of this weekend. So we hope you enjoyed it. By the time you hear this, it will have concluded. I hope you were able to bring some family and friends on and start your watch parties and get people to hear the good news of Christ and be encouraged. But for now, let's go ahead and let's find out a little bit more about Bret. So, Bret, let's start at the beginning. You are a California-raised kid, but where exactly were you growing up? Where did you grow up at?
Well, I grew up in Redwood City, which is about 20 minutes or so south of San Francisco, Bay Area. And didn't realize what a nice place Redwood City is until I went to seminary in Dallas, Texas after graduating from college. Then I realized, boy, the weather in Redwood City is really nice. I just assumed every place in America was like Redwood City. So no, grew up in Redwood City, went to Woodside High, then on to San Jose State, and then after that off to Dallas to attend seminary.
See, already something I didn't know. I didn't know you were a San Jose State guy.
Yes, I'm a Spartan.
I don't think I had heard about that. Now, you ended up with a degree from San Jose State in
business administration. Okay. Yeah, I was going to, I became a Christian in high school, and I thought, boy, it'd be great to go to a Bible college and learn more about the Scripture. But I also knew at that time, really felt a call from God to go to seminary. So I thought better to go to college and major in something a little different just to broaden things out rather than, Bible college and then seminary covers a lot of the same kinds of subjects. So yeah, I was a business administration major at San Jose State.
Yeah, a lot of people I know, just from my own experience growing up in ministry, don't exactly know what kind of education pastors have. And everybody's got their own stories. I know we've got some people on staff with a wide range of degrees and bachelor's degrees and masters and all of that. So it's interesting to know just what got you start business. So did you have aspirations to be a business owner or something before you were in ministry?
Well, when I was in junior college, so I spent a couple of years in junior college, I was trying to figure out what to major in. And I took a couple of business classes as electives, right, in junior college. And I went, well, I really like this. This is really interesting to me. So that's what led to me being a business major, is that I really love the whole subject of it.
Yeah.
But never intended to be in business by that time. I was really looking to complete my bachelor's degree, which was a requirement for graduate degree in seminary. So I had to get a degree in something, and I really enjoyed business. I still do. I still love the subject of it. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, I actually started as a business major and then ended up moving over into communications because I wanted to do more of the interaction stuff with people in classes, and that became a lot more fun. And hey, if this is where we ended up, I'm happy with it.
You're a podcast guy now.
This is fun, man. I've enjoyed this. And microphones, it is different to be speaking into a microphone rather than singing into one, which is a fun change. Because normally, if you let me talk too much on stage, I start to ramble a little bit, and you're like, "Hey, we're on a tight schedule here, so wrap it up there, worship leader."
I don't sing, and you don't speak. That's our agreement. That's
what we should. Yeah, we'll agree on that. So tell me a little bit about your family dynamic growing up. Your parents, siblings, extended family. What was that like, just growing up in Redwood City?
Yeah, I had a twin brother that he passed away last year, which was really a tough thing. He had a battle with cancer, and but I grew up with a twin brother, my older brother, who's still doing well. He's lives in Rincon Valley, right here in Sonoma County, and then my older sister, who lives in Portland, and she's married, her husband, but they don't have any children. But we have, so I grew up with my older sister, my twin, and then my older brother. And then my dad remarried when I was in high school, and I inherited a stepsister at that point, who also has passed away. So a good family dynamic. I mean, growing up with an older brother and a twin brother, we were all into sports together. Right. So you had ready-made, baseball games and kickball or football, whatever you're doing. You had enough to get a game started, with them. And
or a band. I've seen some
yes.
pictures of you guys with your band.
Yes, we had a band. My twin was
the
a
Cobras.
guitar
Is that
player.
what it was?
The Cobras.
Yes.
My twin brother was a guitar player, and then my older brother Scott played some bass and tenor sax, and then I was a drummer. And my older sister played guitar. It was a short-lived gig, although my twin and I continued playing right into high school and right into college and just kept playing. But my other siblings, after our short career, they dropped off.
Now, your brother, this is kind of cool because your brother's guitar is actually here at the church, and we get to play it because Scott had brought it down, and now we've jammed on it a little bit. And one of the amps that we actually used for the Easter services was your brother's amp, which is kind of cool. So he's there.
That.
He's there as well, while Scott's involved still mixing sound. So what sports did you guys play? I know you're an athlete. I've watched you throw a ball and shoot a basket. And so what sports were you into?
Well, my dad, who also passed away a couple of years ago, but he was big time into baseball. That was his thing. He loved baseball. Big Boston Red Sox fan. He grew up in Boston, in the Boston area.
Oh wow!
And so he exposed us to baseball early on. Teaching, I still remember as a kindergartner, 5 years old, playing catch with my dad up in the back of our house. And I remember it distinctly because he threw me a pop-up and it hit me in the eye. And I ended up with a big shiner on my eye it was
like the Sandlot.
It was a hard ball. It wasn't like one of these soft things. It was a hard ball, and I took it right in the eye. And
keep your eye on the ball.
Keep your eye on the ball. Lining up in kindergarten and being teased, I still remember it because I had a black eye. But those kind of things teach you. So I played baseball, Little League, gone into Babe Ruth, we called it, American Legion. I played all the way through high school baseball and then a couple of years in college. So I just kept right on going. Then I played 4 years of football in high school. 1 year of basketball. I enjoyed basketball, but didn't dedicate myself to it enough. But football...
Well, a three-sporter, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So that's hard to be focused on one sport when you're playing the others.
If I could go back, I would want to dedicate more time to basketball and golf.
Yes.
Because now I love to play golf.
I'm still not a golfer. You guys are going to have to figure out how to get me into it because I think I'm to the point where I'm ready to find some competitive things to do outside of basketball.
Yes, you'll move into golf because you can really keep doing it, on.
Maybe not with my back stuff, though. Maybe I'm not going to be a good golfer.
So our family is very athletic. My brothers were into sports, too, and my sister as well. So, and I still love sports to this day. So not having a basketball season right now, the NBA, not being able to watch Major League Baseball, you kidding me? That's really tough. But when we get back into it, we'll appreciate it all the more.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I mean, we've had those lockout seasons with some of those sports, and we've always had little glimpses of what it would be like not to have them. And now it's, everything's, I remember there's like some kind of time during the summer, I don't know if it's the baseball all-star break, sometime where there's no sports on, and it's like 3 days where everybody's just going crazy, and now
There's
here we
golf.
are on week.
Golf
is on, yeah.
on, which
Yeah.
to a lot of people is a non-sport. I
Right.
understand watching somebody putt on a green, and he's going to putt now, and everybody's like, I love
Lines
that.
up his shot.
But yeah, I love that though.
Actually, I probably couldn't do a golf announcer. I don't watch it enough. So yeah, you played a lot of baseball. That's cool. You played in college. I don't think I knew that either. What position were you?
I was a shortstop. Had a good arm, good range. So that was one of the things my dad, when we were really young, was teaching me how to pick up ground balls. He worked real hard on that. So I continued that right into college. I was a shortstop.
Cool. And what kind of kid would you describe yourself? Were you kind of a goofball? Were you outgoing? Were you an introvert? I don't think you're an introvert. You seem pretty outgoing. So, what kind of kid were you?
I'm pretty outgoing. That's a really good question. But when I was younger, and I guess I would just attribute this to some of the family dynamics, it was pretty rough. My dad's marriage to my mom was rough. They ended up divorcing, and it was kind of a difficult thing. And so I would describe my
How old were you when that happened?
When I was in, I think, 5th grade, 4th grade, it was real bad. They finally divorced right when I was in 7th grade. If I got the numbers correct. Sometimes I go back in my mind and I can't put all the timing together.
Yeah.
But I was young. So I think I was more introverted because of that family dynamic.
Interesting.
And some of the intensity, my mom struggled with alcoholism and she drank a lot. And I remember when I was really young, probably 1st grade, 2nd grade, somewhere in there, they would fight at night, and I would wake up for the night, hear them fighting, and it just sort of,
weighs on
shuts you down emotionally, listening to all that stuff, and puts a lot of fear in you. And then I became a Christian in high school, and then when I met my wife, Eve, her acceptance of me, the relationship we have, plus the Lord working in my life, I say the combination of the two things, her acceptance and the Lord working in my life, it's like, wow, I really am more of an outgoing, extroverted type personality. I like to joke around with people. I have fun with that. But I wouldn't describe myself that way growing up and even into the early years of high school because of some of the family dynamics. At least that's how I put it together at this point.
Yeah, so you've told the story before about becoming a Christian in high school. There was a band on campus, and I kind of want to ask you a little bit about what that becoming a Christian. Well, let's go back to the band on campus. What was the timeline there from how long until you started going to church, became a Christian, and got really serious about your faith?
So I was a sophomore in high school at the time, and drinking with my friends. So here I am. I'm an athlete. I'm doing well in sports, all of that. But I'm also...
Were you popular?
I was popular from that standpoint.
Sure.
But again, my personality, not as outgoing as I wanted to be or hope to be, but popular from an athletic standpoint.
Sure.
And drinking with my friends, experimenting with some drugs, smoking some pot, doing things like that. But inside, I was like, I want something different in my life. I don't like this. Mm-hmm. And I think I felt the lack of congruence between what I wanted to be as a person, as an athlete, if you will, in be a success. Mm-hmm. That's sort of in life. I saw the separation between that and what I was doing, and I was heading down a path that was bad. And so I was seeking. I guess you would say when I heard the band come when they first came, I was really beginning to seek. I wanted something different. So here this band comes and they play during lunch. And
a worship band?
Yeah, it was a worship band, but they played played Chicago tunes.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of like they were doing all these crossover tunes. Or I don't know if crossover is the right term. Just, Chicago and other songs. And I remember being intrigued because the class before you went out for lunch, they would read what was happening at lunch. And I still remember sitting in this class and them reading what was going to happen at lunch. Well, there's this former Hell's Angel is going to share his story at lunch, and there's going to be a band. That's what I remember hearing. And I thought, well, I'm going to go check that out. So I'm having my lunch. The band gets up, does a bunch of Chicago tunes. They did them great. I'm like, wow, that's a good band. And then the former Hell's Angel gets up and starts sharing his story. Well, he had become a Christian at a low point in his life as a Hell's Angel. It turned his life around, and he was sharing his story. Well, when I'm listening to this, I'm a seeker, right? I'm seeking. I want change, and God just I don't know how else to describe, but God said, "I'm who you're looking for, Bret. I want to come into your life. I want to change your life. I want this is your moment." I mean, I just felt called by God. And then they passed out flyers about a rally at the church. I think it was going to be this probably on a Monday, and the rally at the church was Tuesday night. And so I wasn't driving at the time, and my dad gave me a ride, and I went to the event. And it was like the first time in that church ever. The only church background I had was going to the Catholic church once in a while because my aunt would ask us to come, my brothers and I, and we'd show up once in a while. So I went down there to the rally, and it was like God was telling me, come, this is I'm calling you.
Yeah.
And I heard the band played some more, which was cool. Then the guy gave a full-blown testimony, the Hell's Angel. And then at the end, if anybody's here and you want to accept Jesus Christ into your life, I'm going to invite you to come forward right now. I want to pray with you and accept Christ. And my heart was beating that night. I still remember it out of my chest. And I got out from my seat, and I went down to the front, and then went into the back room, as they call it, afterwards, and I asked Jesus Christ to come into my life. And then for about a month, I went home, and I didn't know you were supposed to go back to church. I mean, I literally did.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that. It wasn't until after a month that somebody from the church followed up on me, as we call it, followed up and said, hey, do you want to come to church? And I went, sure. So he picked me up. I went to church. Then he said, you want to go to youth group on Tuesday night? And I went, sure. So I went to youth group. There was a bunch of kids in there. And I don't think I've missed church but a half a dozen times since then.
Except for now.
Yeah, except for now.
We're not really missing
Shelter
church,
in
but
place.
just not on campus.
So now I do podcasts.
Yeah, now we do podcasts. I was curious, when you talk about God calling you, saying, Bret, I'm what you're searching for. I've had this question before when I talk about being called into ministry. Was this an audible thing that you're hearing? Was it just something in your heart, a feeling that you're having? Someone that's never really heard the voice of God in their lives guiding them. They're curious as to what does that feel like? What does it sound like? How do I know it's God and not just my own thoughts that's telling me that this is what I'm looking for?
That's such a great question to ask. And no, I wouldn't describe it as an audible voice from God. I've never had that where I would say, boy, God just said something out loud.
Like Samuel.
Like Samuel, yeah, Samuel. Your listeners ought to check that out in 1 Samuel chapter 3 when Samuel, the prophet, is called by God audibly. But for me, it was what theologians call an effectual call. Mm-hmm. Like God is really calling the whole world to consider the gospel. It's going out this weekend with Easter and all. The message is going out. A lot of people are hearing it.
Right.
I mean, thousands and thousands of people, in the millions maybe, are hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. So, but for some, it's different. They hear their name. It's like, it's an effectual call. Okay. Right. It's an effectual call, which means all of a sudden you lean in and you go, what did they say about Jesus Christ dying for me? And God loves me. And you hear God loves me, and it's coming directly to you. And Jesus died for sinners, and I can be forgiven. I can be forgiven. See, I don't know how else to describe it except for the work of God, the effectual call of God, in which he calls your name, and you say yes to him. I mean, I don't know. People's story is a little different.
Right.
Each conversion, if you will, is different, but mine was definitely an effectual call.
Yeah, for me, it was more of a, once I started listening, that was kind of the time when I started to feel God moving me in a direction when I was actually listening and willing to follow his path. Question for you about your family dynamic after you became a Christian. You had mentioned that you and your brothers, you'd go to the Catholic Church every now and then. What did becoming a Christian do to your family dynamic? How did it change the dynamic you had, maybe the relationship with your parents, with your siblings?
Another good question. I went home that night. Remember, my dad picked me up from the meeting at the church where I accepted Jesus as my Savior, and he picked me up and he said, Brett, how did it go tonight? We're in the car. And I said, well, Dad, tonight I asked Jesus Christ to come into my life. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, that's nice.
That's nice.
So he obviously didn't get it, right?
That's sweet.
That's nice. It's like, that's good. Okay, so we go home, and I start going to church, and I start growing as a Christian. I start to read my Bible. I remember I went down, I used to go down in the garage every morning and just open the Bible and read and pray. And I started a good discipline of prayer and Bible reading to help me grow. And I started growing. And my dad noticed the change in my life right away. And I still remember him saying, because we had chores to do and lawn work, and my attitude was just better. The Lord had changed my life. The joy started coming into my life too. And I think that's when my personality, I started feeling the freedom that Christ gives, the forgiveness, new life. And my quality of chores was better. And my dad said to me one time, he said, I know you're a Christian because of the way you do the lawn.
I was going to ask if the lawn, if that's where that comes from. Yeah.
So, I like good lawn work, but I was anything but a good chore guy. Is that a term, a noun? Chore guy. And my dad said, I know you become a Christian because of the way you do the lawn.
Interesting.
Thought, wow. And so my attitude was better. I responded to my dad well. I shared the Lord with my brothers. I tried to evangelize all of them.
So God put you to work right away.
Yeah, I started trying to evangelize them, and eventually, thank God, both my brothers came around.
That's awesome.
But they didn't respond to my preaching early on.
And Scotty now runs the soundboard.
Yeah,
during
he's
the services.
Involved in the church now. Praise the Lord for that.
So any sound complaints you can direct towards Scotty. No, I'm just kidding. So we're talking about you being called and feeling God saying, Brett, I'm who you're seeking. What about your call to ministry? When did you know that God was calling you to ministry?
Well, when I started to grow as a Christian, I did different things in the church. I remember the first job I had was putting the pencils in the pews. We had this traditional pew church, and they had pencils and envelopes for giving and that kind of thing. So Sunday morning, I got there early, and I replaced the envelopes and did the pencils. That was my first job.
Nice. That's where you started
you
serving.
feel like you're serving the Lord.
You're on the team.
It feels good. You're on the team. And I really, I was really happy to do that. And then as I continued to grow as a Christian, I remember the first time I was asked to lead a small group. It was a Sunday school class and lead a discussion, right? And I still remember, I think I talked for like 45 minutes.
Right.
I was supposed to facilitate. And so that didn't go overly well, but I was learning. And then, as the years go by, this is probably after I'd been a Christian for 2 years, maybe 3 years, I was asked to teach a Bible study. And, because of my own personal devotional time in the morning, I'd learned a lot. So I put together a talk, and I gave it. I teaching, and I loved doing it. I loved the preparation of it. I loved giving the talk and all that. And someone came up to me afterwards and said this. They said, when are you going to go to seminary? It was like, and I totally know what they meant, but it was like, when are you going to go get trained to be in the ministry?
Right.
You have gifts for ministry. And that just captivated me. And I really wanted at that point to go into ministry. I didn't even know what going into ministry looked like. I didn't know totally what all my spiritual gifts were.
Putting pencils in the back of seats full time.
Yeah, right. You can't
just
get a
go around.
full-time
Just go around the
job doing
state.
that.
Just work all the churches.
Yeah, all the states. So, I ended up enjoying studying and teaching so much. And as I began to investigate seminaries and what they taught and what it was about, that's when I, made my plans to go to San Jose State, get the bachelor's degree, and then go off to Dallas Seminary. So the call to ministry, I would say, was seeing God had given me spiritual gifts that I really loved doing, and that I actually could do it full time because I could be a pastor. I could, teach his word and all of that. So if anybody's wondering about a call to ministry, I would say identify your spiritual gifts first of all. And then if there is a profession out there that you could do your spiritual gifts full time, then consider it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird way to say it. In other words, to your point, you can't be paid to put pencils and envelopes, certain spiritual gifts, which are so important in the body of Christ, there's no profession for it. Right. So and then your spiritual gifts have to be of a substance where somebody would be willing to hire you.
Sure.
How do I say that nicely? Some guys might have a gift, there's a profession, but they're not going to get hired. So I'd say don't go to seminary unless people have affirmed your gifts, mm-hmm. and you really sense this is what you're to, God wants you to do full time. Again, I understand that's a little subjective, but other people will help affirm you in that. And you shouldn't go train for the ministry until you've been affirmed a lot in your gifts, and God will use different people to sort of prod you along. Right.
Yeah. Did you ever feel any resistance towards going into ministry, or was it once you felt called, you were just gung-ho, I'm on my way, this is what I'm doing?
Yeah, I was fortunate in that way. I remember my dad telling me when he asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him I wanted to go to college, I wanted to go to seminary, I wanted to be in ministry, and I wanted to be a pastor. And even though he wasn't a Christian at the time, it really filled him with a sense of joy, because he was like, how amazing that I really had a clear picture of where I wanted to be and do and what I wanted to, accomplish, so to speak. And so to answer your question, when I realized I had teaching gifts and I realized I could go to seminary, no, I was on a track to go finish college, go to seminary, get a job. And there was never a time when I really doubted it. Now, once getting into the ministry, you go through some hard times and you do doubt.
What was your first job in ministry?
First job in ministry was at the church I was attending in Dallas. I was the assistant to the singles pastor. Okay. So, I just helped him part-time.
How old were you at this point?
Job. So I started seminary after college at 23. So, I was 23 years old.
And this is where you met Eve, right?
No, I actually met Eve. So here's the story about Eve. I met Eve when I was still in high school before going to college, and then we were in a band together.
Oh, that's right. I knew that.
Yeah. So then I left to go to Dallas, and we had started dating and then dated on and off, and then eventually we got married in 1986. So, but my first job was just an assistant.
Right.
And then I became, actually, when that pastor changed within the church to a different staff position, I became the singles pastor.
Right. And would you say Eve equally had that call to ministry? Because Eve is on staff here too, and she does a great job with the kids and ministering to a lot of people here. So was she sharing that call?
Yeah, Eve, I would say even more so. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, because she grew up in such a different family than mine. Her family, they went to church. She sort of grew up in a Christian family, although she would probably describe it as a little more of a growing up in a church-going family, but and a little more of the conservative side of things. I don't know what to say, but she definitely had an experience where she came to know the Lord and was growing spiritually, and so her call to ministry was every bit as strong as mine, if not more. I mean, and
so you recruited her to your team.
Yeah, if you're
draft
that's
pick.
The other thing, by the way. If anybody's listening to this and they're thinking about, I want to go into ministry, I'd say, and you're married, your wife needs to be
on board.
And if she's not, then you got to take time to let her get on board or to reconsider, because
Yeah.
you can't do ministry by yourself.
So what about the point where you felt like you were called to be a lead pastor? Because it's, ministry. Obviously, there's so many different things we could be doing. Myself, I started as a youth pastor, and I eventually felt called to the music side of it. I don't think lead pastoring is something that's in my future. So I'm wondering, what was the point where you felt that call to be, I want to be a lead pastor of a church? And
Yeah, I was so I became the singles pastor, and the staff in Dallas. It was a Fellowship Bible Church of Dallas. It was a church of about 2,000, and there was about 15 of us on staff. Actually, it didn't start
1,500 on staff. That would be quite the church.
Yeah, I'd be quite a staff. 15. It grew to 2,000, but it started out as a church plant, so it was small. But I watched the church grow while I was on staff as a singles pastor, and watched the senior pastor. Appreciated him so much. Great guy. I learned a lot just watching the lead pastor, as we call him, right? Senior pastor, lead pastor, same idea. I watched
Senior
him.
just kind of makes you sound old.
Yeah, I like lead pastor.
Lead pastor. Head pastor.
I watched him as an associate pastor. Now, being an associate pastor was a nice spot because you kind of learn from the senior pastor, but he takes all the heat.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just would watch him and pray for him and all that. And there came a time when Eve and we considered, do I make a full-time, do I just be a singles pastor and do other things within that ministry, and so stay put doing that, or do I go into being a lead pastor, senior pastor of a church? And I really felt like I wanted to not stay in single adult ministry the rest of my life, but to move into that. And so it was sort of a process of thinking it all through. And that's how God guides you, though. You're praying about something, and then as you're thinking it through and you talk it through, He's guiding and directing all that. Yeah. And you end up where he wants you to be if you're humble to respond and do what he wants you to do. You'll get there.
Right.
You'll get there. He uses the whole process. And one of the significant things was thinking through, do I want to go into an existing church, or do we want to start a church from scratch? And that
was going to be my next question. What about church planting? What was that process like? And, being called into being a lead pastor, whether you're taking over a spot where another pastor has either stepped down, retired, whatever it is, or starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And especially moving, a few thousand miles away from Dallas back to your home area.
Yeah, that was another one of those process questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to be a singles. I don't want to be a singles pastor the rest of my life. I want to be a lead pastor. Do you want to go into an existing church and so send out your resume to different churches and try to get hired? Or do you want to start a church from scratch? Now, the reason I had the idea of starting a church from scratch is because Fellowship Bible Church, where I was on staff, was started that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very creative church. It was really one of the early churches to have a full band and all that, rather than just piano and organ, the old traditional type church. And I watched it grow. I watched it grow from a church of 250 up to 2,000. And so the idea of starting a church, particularly starting a church like this, so the one I was in Dallas, in the Bay Area where I grew up, started to become very intriguing, because I knew in the Bay Area there weren't any churches like that. The Bible Belt in Dallas, the South, was way ahead of the churches in California. And so then it became, well, why don't we start a church from scratch? Because then you can do a lot of things you want to do.
Right.
You don't have the tradition of an existing church. You can
to change something.
Yeah.
Which is difficult in the church
takes
setting
time.
Sometimes, yeah.
And then let's do it where we grew up, because there's nothing there. So that was the whole process. And so we made a visit to the Bay Area, here, and considered a lot of different spots.
In Sacramento, right?
Sacramento, we considered starting the church there, and starting the church down, in Dublin and down Tracy area, kind of that.
Oh yeah, that's my neck of the woods.
Yeah, your neck of the woods. We looked there.
A lot of churches over there.
Yeah, and ended up in Santa Rosa. So starting a church from scratch with a kind of the vision we picked up through being on staff in Dallas. That's another really, if somebody wanted to start a church, I'd say, look, if you can get a vision from your participation in a growing church, in a church that fits what you could see yourself doing, get the vision first. And then when you start it, you know where you're going. So what we're doing now, these 28 years later, is really what I envisioned early on.
Right.
The band, the approach, the people coming, even the facility here, just a lot of this.
We do have a very unique facility.
Yes.
We get a lot of comments on that with people being in here, like, it doesn't feel like a church, comments like that. And it's very unique. I remember walking here for the first time and thinking that, like, oh, this is different. Like, it's really cool. I like this. It's wide open, and wow, the vineyards, and it's just really cool campus.
Yeah. So, the call to being a lead pastor was, and I really didn't know what I was getting into. But thankfully, over the years, we've had just such a great staff, and really the people that don't have a ton of church background or expectations. When you start a church, you're reaching people that don't go to church. That's the whole idea.
Right.
So when they come in, they don't say, well, you're not doing it the way, they don't have any of that. So you're saved some of the trying to please everybody in that situation. And they come because they like it. And we've been really blessed, I would say, over the years to be able to do the things at Spring Hills Church that I've always wanted to do, that Eve's always wanted to do. And thankfully, it's reached some people for Christ.
Yeah. And, like you said, I think you said we're approaching 28 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
92, right?
Yeah. So this Easter weekend will be our 29th Easter, the completion of our 28th year.
Yeah, that's amazing. First time we've ever not been on campus for it, right?
Yeah.
Or met for it, which is that's pretty historical. You said last week in your sermon that, I forget the exact quote, but basically, could it be that more people are going to hear the gospel this weekend than ever before in history? And that puts a great perspective on what's going on right now, because it was such a bummer when we found out we weren't going to be able to be on campus for Easter, because Easter, we've got the extravaganza, we've got the whole weekend. It's this big event, and so many families get to come here. But man, that quote really put in perspective, like, yeah, watch Facebook today, and we've got the Good Friday service going, and oh my goodness, there's a lot of people watching this and hearing this gospel message.
I shared about our Good Friday service. I shared it on my Facebook page, and my comment was to encourage, because I have a lot of people from high school that knew me in high school on my friend list, and my comment was, God has us in shelter in place because He wants to speak to you.
Yeah,
He wants to talk to you.
Yeah, He's taking away the sports and the idols and
God's got
all the different stuff.
Everybody
home.
home.
In our life. Everybody's home.
He wants to say something to you. So I just kind of left it
distractions are much more limited right now, and in some ways, other ways they're heightened, because we're on screens all the time. I was going to ask though, with the church being now a full 28 years old, a lot of our staff were only a few years old, maybe not even born yet. So that's kind of cool just to look at. I mean, your daughter being on staff, and I think she was 2 when
she was 2 years old
when you planted the church, right? And now she's I think executive producer is her title, I think.
Yeah.
But looking back, if you were to be able to sit here at this table with Bret from 1992, the Good Friday before you're launching on Easter, what would be the first thing of advice, or the most important thing of advice you'd give him?
I heard this when I was starting the church. Okay, I heard this, but I didn't do it.
Okay.
I would take this advice. I would say you need to start now to have a group that you're going to disciple, and have a group of, Jesus had the 12, and then He had Peter, James, and John that He really, built into their lives even more. So, but Jesus took this group of 12 people and discipled them for 3 years, and then sent them out in the power of the Holy Spirit to start churches and to teach. And we have all the letters of the letters in the New Testament from these same disciples. And it's amazing what Jesus taught them. And so they launched the whole church. I'm saying that to say that I'd probably say to whatever you do as a young pastor starting a church, whatever you do, get your group now to start discipling and do it. Have a disciple, whether it's a discipleship group every year
Right.
or every 2 years, but see that, start building your leadership
Right.
up and disciple people. Because the reason I say I didn't listen to it is not because it's not important. It's crucial, but I wanted to go faster. I've always
Right,
wanted
yeah.
to go faster. To me,
Quicker results.
let's get the band good and draw in some people.
So God tested your patience a lot throughout the years with, I mean, this campus was a great example of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything's taken longer. But my personality is like, I want to see results now. So
Yeah.
let's make it happen, be an attractional church, which is important also. But you want to have substance and build into your leaders. And it's sort of like you might feel like you're starting slow there, but the overall multiplier is incredible. And that's what
Right.
Jesus knew and modeled.
Right.
Jesus modeled that. So yeah, in my zeal to get things up and going, and to have a church that was attractive, I just that seemed way too slow. And I
Yeah.
still battle with that now because I like results. I want
Right.
to see things happen fast. But that's not the way the Lord operates, and that's not the way He operated.
His time, right?
His
Don't
time.
do what Abraham and Sarah did.
Yes, don't get ahead of
Don't
God.
get ahead of His plan.
Right.
So I want to ask you a few questions. We talked about the staff being kind of young, and some of these staff are your family. So you've got Kiki being your daughter, and then Ashley being your niece, and obviously Ashley being married. That's your niece's husband. And
Is
then
that
you've
my
got
niece-in-law? Who is that?
your nephew-in-law, right? Nephew-in-law.
Second
That's
nephew-in-law.
the warty boy.
Yeah.
And then you've got Eve, your wife, on staff as well. Am I forgetting anybody from your family on?
I think
I mean,
that's it. I'd forgotten about it. Ashley being my niece. Sometimes I forget about that. Yeah.
Well, and then a few of the other girls that are on staff, they really look at you and Eve as parental figures in their lives too.
Yeah, we love that.
You've basically created this family, even with some that aren't blood relatives. But what would you say the reason your family's been able to work together, not only work together, but also remain very close? You still have a good relationship with the family here. So what would you say is like the maybe I don't want to say number one reason, but what would you say is a reason that you guys are able to work together and remain close?
Yeah, well, there's a variety of reasons. One is they're gifted from God, which is cool.
They're all called.
They're very called and they're very gifted. They love ministry. If they weren't on staff, they'd be involved in a volunteer level. The reason they're on staff,
And most of them were at first.
yeah,
right?
they were volunteered for years and years. They're on staff because they have gifts. I mean, pastors have to watch for that. I guess it's like you don't want nepotism,
Right.
Where it's like they have a job because they're the pastor's kid. Well, that's not who I am. I mean, I my wife has tremendous gifts, and Kiki has gifts in what she's doing, and they're pretty strong. So it was like, wow, the timing worked out for Kiki in particular to come on staff, and she started in a different position than she's at now. Started with students, and then moved into single adults, and then moved into more the production end. She was overseeing children for a while.
She has her degree from Biola in.
Yeah, she's a Christian leadership major from Biola University,
Right, okay.
which set her up nicely. She was going to be a business major and felt a real call from God to be in ministry. She wanted to apply at a large church down in Southern California, and they were very interested in her and wanted her to apply. They liked her. And then she came up to Sonoma County here to help us out, I think, with a student event. And the Lord spoke to her, and it's like, why would she use her gifts in, the LA area when this is where she grew up, and she felt like she could really reach students in Sonoma County. So it was an interesting thing.
Her roots are here.
So she was part-time, and then she, sort of moved up. But to answer your question, they're on staff because of their gifting. And they would really, I'm convinced they would do a lot of what they're doing, although not at the level or the amount of time, but in a volunteer way if they weren't on staff. And we share a real love for the church, a real vision for reaching people.
There's
that
the
need
common
Christ.
goal. The primary
Yeah.
goal is we know that people in our county need Jesus, and
Yeah.
we want to do that. And sometimes there's the secondary or tertiary things that maybe there can be some disagreements, but you can have those disagreements and get through them if you have the same primary focus and goal. I planted a church with my dad and worked very closely with my family at a very small church, but I've seen a little bit the struggles of working together as a family, how different arguments or disagreements can come up, and it can be very hard. So being in ministry is incredibly rewarding. Also be very tough on a family, whether your family is in ministry with you or not. Requires sacrifice. Obviously, a lot of time and focus is going into the things that are going on at the church. So what advice could you give maybe some younger families that are in ministry? We have a lot of young families at our church on staff. And what advice could you give them to be able to keep their family relationship strong while they're in ministry?
Yeah, I think that's, that's a good one. It takes a lot of time, and you want to be careful that you don't get so drained, that you get out of balance. The relationship, sometimes, frankly, we can be working on things, Eve and I, or within some of the family members, working on something in the church that's so consuming that there's not enough balance time just to hang out. And I think that... well,
that was going to be another question of mine, because your family's in ministry with you. When you're hanging out, ministry discussion or talk has to probably come up at some point. And how do you navigate that and are able to put it aside to make it to where this is still a family and not just coworkers?
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you have to just say, on a day off, say, stop talking about the next vision. And the one who does that the most is my wife.
Yeah.
She's the one who wants to talk about the next thing we could do.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
I've seen that actually at, different gatherings, Thanksgiving and stuff, where she'll start talking about something and you're like, we're just making turkeys today. That's what this is about, turkeys.
So you have to, having a day the day off where you just discipline yourself. You say, we're going to talk about other things, there's other things to talk about.
Watch the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl. But I would say that to our young staff. It's okay you want to be balanced in life. They work so hard. We have this staff that, which for me being a lead pastor makes it a lot easier, because you don't have to tell them to do things. You have to tell them to not do so much.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to tell them, be creative and get an idea. You have to say, be sure to take some time for your family or yourself or whatever. It's just the opposite of, I think, what some leaders have to do to try to motivate. I don't have to motivate. I have to just try to keep them more balanced.
Yeah, we've gotten text messages from Kiki saying no one's allowed to work tomorrow.
Yeah,
take the day off. I know we have a lot going on, but take the day off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
because ministry can be a bottomless pit. It can be something that a sinkhole where you get in helping somebody, the next thing.
Right. Yeah.
It never stops. It never ends. So you're going to have to be like Jesus and get away, be quiet, spend time. I love the verse in the Gospels where the disciples come up to Jesus when he's been praying, and they say, everybody's looking for you. Like, what are you doing over here taking time to pray? Everybody's looking for you. And Jesus says, let's go to a different town, for I know that's why I've been called. And he's like, let's go. I love that verse. Listening to God rather than all the demands.
Yeah. So going into some trials and things being trying, I was thinking about this. You've been now, because of your church planting roots, you were a pastor of a smaller church. How many people were there at that Easter Sunday?
Yeah, so in 92, April 19th, 1992, we had people who flew out from Dallas to support the new church. And then, since I grew up in Redwood City, which is an hour and a half south of Santa Rosa, we had a bunch of friends come up from there.
Right.
So we had like 100 people, which was great. I remember going home.
Maybe the better question is, how many people were at church the following Sunday?
Week, there was like 27 people.
Okay.
27. And we had like 27 people for the rest of that year. So starting in April, and then really to the end of the year, we averaged probably 27 people.
Yeah.
And that got rough.
Yeah.
We did big mailers trying to get more people, and that didn't work. And I think it was, and then because I came from a church in Dallas that had grown to a couple
larger
thousand,
church, yeah.
right? And so it was God's way of saying, this is going to be my doing.
This is
not
me.
yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're nothing.
You're not going to be doing the work. Yeah. So from the outside looking in, being I've been on staff at small churches. I grew up at kind of a, medium-sized church where it fluctuated from 600 to 1,000 people or so, where my dad was the senior associate pastor. And then when I got into ministry, I was at small churches, both from somewhere between 25 and 50 people. And outside looking in sometimes, the pastor of a smaller church or staff of a smaller church could have the perception, I'm speaking because I had this perception, that pastors of larger churches don't have as much stress as smaller churches do. And the fact that I grew up at a larger church, knowing what my dad was stressed about, and then now being on staff here at Spring Hills, knowing just the different stresses, how can pastors of larger churches encourage and build up the pastors with smaller congregations when it's looking like we don't have the same kind of stresses, kind of like you don't know what it feels like, that kind of thing, and we're all having our own trials and stresses through things. So especially this make me think of this right now with the economy and being shelter in place. Smaller churches are going to be hit in a hard way.
Yeah, they are, and yeah, you're right. The larger the church, it's just a different set of trials, difficulties, challenges, put it that way, different set at a larger level than a smaller one. I mean, there's churches that are 10 times the size of Spring Hills, and it's 10 times.
It's just the scale.
It's the scale. The money's scaled. If you're a smaller church, you need so much. If you're a larger church, you need so much. If you go mega church, you need so much. And so it's all scaled down. This current shelter in place, I wonder if it's going to affect some of the larger churches more, only because the financial demands are much bigger. And, so I don't know. But I would love, one thing I would love to do most would be to have smaller churches and new churches, new church plants get around the table and talk to them about some of the lessons we learned over the years, just to encourage them and to help them. And that's something that's been on my mind forever, to do that. And Lord willing, maybe I'll get to do more of that. You're a church planter. Do an internship here at our staff, and let's talk to you, and then send you out. Now, the Lord just hasn't brought that all about, but boy, I'm sounding the word now. I would love that. Interns who want to start churches, coming to Spring Hills, and you'll just be a part of this. So you get that vision I was talking about. What do you want to produce when you go out there? You can already see it. Mm-hmm. So I would love to encourage. We try to with some of the pastors in town, and we're doing this more and more with, bi-monthly gatherings and stuff like that. But yeah, you don't want to be perceived like, oh, you're the large church and you guys got multiple staff
and you're fine and you don't have the struggles.
And so I don't really call them. I kind of want them to call me, because if I call them, then it sounds like, oh, you just think
I have something to offer.
Right. But if they call me, I'm all over it. Like, yeah, let's get together and I would love to encourage you.
And there's things that that pastors of other churches encourage you with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a one-way street there. You've called other pastors and asked for encouragement or needed encouragement from them. So it goes both ways there. I'm curious, what's maybe one of the more trying times that you and Eve experienced in, it doesn't necessarily have to be the early years, but just within the church plant as a whole and in the growth, what was one of the more trying times?
Well, one of the things what can happen in a church is that you can have a group of people that have a different vision for the church than you have.
Especially when you get to as large as...
Yeah, and now that we're a larger church, and not so much, and plus we've learned a lot about the people to bring on to leadership.
Right,
who do you bring on?
Right.
You bring people on to leadership who share the vision, who share the, not just the big picture vision, but they share the philosophy, they share the culture of the church. I'm a big outreach guy, so if you're an outreach person and you love that, then you come into the leadership and you like what we're doing, the creative things we do, some of the out-of-the-box things we do. We've had problems over the years, different occasions, and God's always used them for good, praise his name. But we've had challenges over the years when people have got into leadership who have a different vision for the church. They have a different view of it. They have a different philosophy of it. There's examples I could give you about this, but it's like they think that the church should look like this, and then I or some of our other leaders feel like the church should look like this.
Right.
Both are right. Okay, there isn't a right or wrong, but it's a philosophy, it's a culture thing. And that
even if you share the primary goal of we want to share the gospel.
Yes. How we're going to
That's why we have different churches. We've got some
exactly.
different, and that's great. There's,
one person wants to get there this way. The other person wants, and so that's been the challenges over the years, is that if that grows, and then what can happen is one says, I think the church should get to that goal this way, but they say this way is the right way.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Or the moral way, or the biblical way, or any of that. And then all of a sudden it becomes to them this thing they have to do to maintain the integrity of the Bible, and then the devil can get in there and cause division.
Was there ever a time that you wanted to give it up?
Yes. Matter of fact, we had a time where we almost merged with another church, and because I was exhausted and we had just come through one of those tough times. And I can't remember. It actually didn't have to do with philosophy as much as it kind of did. It had to do with some staffing issues and what do we do about certain staffing issues and all of that. So we got really drained. I think Eve was at a point where she was telling me, I don't know if I can continue to do this. And it was when my wife gets exhausted, and then it's bad because she has more endurance than I have, or I'll ever have. So we considered merging with another church, and we started talking to our church about the merger, and we started exploring it and having meetings. And then it was interesting how God worked. I started having people say to me, well, I don't want to lose our church.
Right.
I love what we're doing here. And what does this mean again? And what is this going to look like? And, oh, no, that was coming from so many different people that it was like the Lord, I was encouraged.
How far in was this?
This would have been, I want to say, year 5, 6, something like that, maybe, somewhere in there. And I was like, God was saying, no, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
This is a unique approach. I've raised up Spring Hills for a purpose, and you need to hang in there. One of the verses that always encouraged me was out of Galatians 6. Don't grow weary in well doing, for you will reap. Kind of a reap a harvest if you faint not. But that was a tough time, almost willing to give up. But then, see, God provides what you need, the time you need it to keep you doing what he's called you to do.
Right, yeah. This is, this is kind of a long question, but there's the glimpse of the temptations that Satan threw at Jesus to knock him down before he entered his public ministry. The three of them for us to observe: follow the appetites of the flesh, act with his power as the word of God outside of the will of God, and to worship something and someone else besides God. So Jesus refuted all these temptations with God's word, with the sharp accuracy that the Holy Spirit provides to discern error from truth. So were there times in your journey of your ministry that you saw temptations try to defer you from walking in the truth of the gospel? Yeah,
and I shared with another pastor the most difficult time for me was after we moved on to the property here.
Oh, okay.
I think if I was to probably say the most difficult times spiritually, like thinking of Jesus' encounter with the devil and discouragement, two of them would have been probably after we had started the church after a year, and then when we got moved into the property here, about a year after moving in. And I look back on those two times, and it was like, am I having a midlife crisis here? I mean, why am I feeling things? Why do I just want to get out of here? Why do I just want, not because I want to give up on the ministry, but because I just want to go, to an island somewhere or a beach. I mean, it was bad in that sense. Thankfully, we got through that, but they came after really intense times of exertion. Starting the church was very intense. Getting moved here from Dallas, getting it started, all the details. The church got up and running. We were finally able to be self-sustaining as a church. And then sort of, boy, I'm exhausted and I need a break. And then after we moved on to the property here, which was another amazing exertion, raising money, going through the county for the permit process, buying the land, developing it, finally getting it to where we could occupy and have a sanctuary. I mean, all that, I was coming on the other side of that was really difficult.
Right.
And a pastor friend of mine who went through a building program, I told him, I said, they raised money, they bought a building, they refurbished it, they did all this stuff. And to expand their ministry, which was great, and they did it. But I told him when he went into it, I said, now when you get through this, you should take a sabbatical of some sort. You just need to, because I told him that's what time I felt the weakest and the most vulnerable to temptations was at the end of that. The problem is, for me, you just moved on to the property. Now you got to get this church growing so you can pay for everything. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and then I know for him, it's the same.
It was such a huge leap of faith to get this property. Right. So now you've got to keep going along God's path and make sure you're not going to. You
got the church started. You can't leave now.
Yeah.
And so, but that's partly probably the devil's lie, is that you can't move away from it. You can't take a break. You need to keep the pedal to the metal. Well, I got through that through some personal counseling, went through some counseling with a Christian counselor and talked through that. Thankfully, my wife is such a wonderful, understanding, godly person, talked through the emotions of that and on and on. But it was a tough period. Some churches have built-in sabbaticals for their pastors, which is really a good thing. Mm-hmm. They need to get away from the ministry for 2-3 months. Some do it longer than that, some a little shorter, but especially after intense times of exertion, that's when you're most vulnerable to temptation.
Yeah. Looking back on my own relationship with God, or even my friendships, just with people or coworkers, family, I can look back and kind of pinpoint certain times where those relationships grew substantially. So I often look back at my relationship with God like that, and I could point, if I drew out a timeline of my whole walk with God, I can pinpoint some different times and experiences where my relationship really took a huge leap there, and an understanding of who God is, and it really expanded my knowledge of who God is and what God is in my life, and where I've put him, and as far as like if he's the God of my life, or is he someone that I've got co-leading my life, and I take this big step of like, nope, you're going to take it all. And I can remember that time when I'm like, I'm no longer going to try to help you guide my life. Can you pinpoint any times in your life where your relationship with God really grew substantially, where it was like, that was a pivotal moment where I understood this, and that understanding really helped me to grow in my relationship with God?
Well, there's two things. One was the pastor I had in Dallas, where I was an associate pastor working with singles. He helped me to understand the grace of God for the first time. I was very hard on myself. My dad was a perfectionist type guy. That's why I knew how to mow the lawn really well. And when I became a Christian and was doing a good job in the lawn, I mean, it was really good.
Because God's perfect, and now you have a relationship with someone that's perfect.
Yeah, and so that's what happened. I became a Christian, and I thought God was an ultimate perfectionist. And so for the early years of my Christian life, I was very both legalistic, trying to keep all the rules, and pretty discouraged at the same time. And that pastor helped me understand the gospel of grace. I mean, it really did. That it's and the cross, what Jesus did for me, paid it all, and that's why Jesus came, because I'll never measure up.
Right.
So he really gave me the theology of it. But over the years, I've seen where at many of my worst points, some of those trying, testing, temptation times that I mentioned earlier, that God continued to be faithful to me and blessed me. And it was like, okay, I've thought some things, I've done some things in my heart, I that justifies God condemning me forever.
Yeah.
And then he turned around and blessed me, or he turned around and provided for me. And it was like I had the theology of his grace. Now I was having the experience of his grace. And the combination of those two things, which continue to grow even to this day, I'm digging deeper into the gospel, understanding the theology of God becoming human, giving his life on the cross. I mean, that you can go pretty deep into the theology of that. And my own sinfulness. I think the older I get as a Christian, the more I realize how pervasive my sin is, my selfishness, and combining the understanding of the grace of God with the depth of my own sin and seeing what God's done for me. My love for him's growing. It's like you fall in love with people who extend to you mercy and they extend to you grace. And so I wouldn't say it was one particular event, although it's a definite combination of the theology of grace and the experience of God's grace and God's faithfulness that has caused me to love him all the more. And it really shapes the philosophy of our church and of what I love to preach about is that. I just love from the scriptures, teach people the wonderful good news of the gospel.
Yesterday, Geraldine was in here and she was recording a devotional, and she had what I called the quote of the day, which was, just to make sure I sent this to Kiki because I was like, Geraldine, this is a really good quote. I'm probably going to get it wrong, but she said, "I need to understand not to ramble about the gospel that I love."
Oh,
because she's
good.
doing the devotionals. She's trying to cut down the time, and the first time she did it, she's trying to get 5 minutes, and she went 12. And she's like, "I just love the gospel too much. I don't want to stop talking about it." And I'm like, Hey, you know what? That's a good problem to have. So before we get going here, I want to do some rapid fire questions, just to kind of get to know you on a personal level with some of these things. So some of them are pretty, probably pretty pointless as far as life goes, but they're fun to talk about. So on a more ministry side, who's the biggest influence to you in your ministry? Or it doesn't have to just be ministry, in life. Who was the biggest influence to you, inspiration?
I'd have to say that pastor, because I was impressionable. I was at a seminary, the pastor in Dallas. His name is Bill Counts. He's retired now, but I love him so much. And he was most significant because he modeled to me a pastorate he was himself. He just tried to be himself. And he taught me theology and got me really started on understanding the grace of God.
Yeah, cool. So what was his name?
Bill Counts.
Bill Counts in Dallas,
He's written a couple
right?
of books, in Dallas. He's retired now, but he definitely is, if I look back, the most pivotal, influential person.
What about what's your biggest? Maybe this is a weird question, but what's your biggest goal in life? Something you want to accomplish? What's like on your bucket list of something you want to do? I heard. I think it was Chris Hodges talking about this and saying, like, have a bucket list, like to go and see this, landmark or whatever it is. Do you have something on your bucket list? Like, I got to do that at some point.
I would love to. I would love to be more involved in missions, like going. Mm-hmm. I love to go cross-culturally and teach.
Where have you've been to Vietnam? You've been
to Vietnam a couple of times, down to South Africa on a mission trip for different purposes, Mexico and things like that. So not a lot, but I'd love to go, have a great interpreter, and just teach theology.
Yeah.
That would be my love. The other thing I'd love on the bucket list of ministry would be, like we talked about, to do more training, to do what I was encouraged to do when I started, disciple young pastors, leaders in theological truth, particularly the gospel.
Yeah.
Because that shaped my life. It shaped my ministry. And so many young pastors, they need to be freed up by the gospel themselves, and they need to articulate it clearly from the scriptures to people, because if they do, people will get saved.
What about a non-ministry bucket list? What's at the top of that?
Non-ministry bucket list right now would be to continue to develop my golf game and to be able to play some of the famous
Augusta?
courses. Yes. all of that takes time and is expensive. That's the only
Yeah.
problem with it. And then you have to know the right people.
Right. Yeah. Connections.
But if I had that, I'd love to play some of the really nice, famous golf courses.
Right. Will you ever write a book?
What was that?
Will you ever write a book?
I think about that.
Sorry.
that.
Yeah. These are going to seem random.
Yeah,
They're
those
just
are
going to
good.
be rapid fire.
Those are good. That's a really good one. Would you ever write a book? I've thought about that, and I think about it probably every couple of months. And I get two thoughts on it. One, there's somebody else writing the same thing that they do better. You know, they do better. They write better books. So maybe I shouldn't, but I do. Maybe at some point, I would, just to capture some of the things we're talking about here today.
Yeah.
If for even my grandkids or for people that have been part of the church or something like
or
that.
a church planter that needs
Yeah.
some advice on how to move about it.
Yeah.
All right. So, what were your hobbies growing up? We kind of touched on them a little bit, but
Yeah,
hobbies
sports,
growing up.
mostly sports and music.
Drama or anything like that?
No.
Stand-up comedy?
No, none of that. None of that. I'm finding now that in this shelter in place, doing radio like we're doing, this is radio,
fun. Yeah.
right? And doing some of the video stuff is very fun. But
Yeah.
growing up, I was very intimidated by it, very awkward, very fearful of it. And I think that was all connected to what I said earlier about feeling sheltered personally, emotionally.
Yeah, you shared that Kiki was like that when she was little, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
yeah, that's interesting that you both kind of had that. And now both of you do so well in front of people.
Yeah,
and,
you can't shut them up,
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
in a good way, though. But
In a good way.
So hobbies now, have they changed?
Now it's primarily, if you want to say reading and that as a hobby, that's one, although mostly nonfiction stuff. And then golf.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sports teams? Who are your favorite sports teams?
Sports teams, of course I
Where are
enjoy
your
watching the
allegiances?
Warriors over
I
the
gotta
last
say,
2 years.
I was with you guys on Super Bowl Sunday, and I had to go in the other room because you guys were all pulling for not necessarily the Chiefs, but for certain players because you were in some kind of DraftKings deal or something.
Yes.
And I was rooting for the Niners, and I felt like everyone in the house was rooting for the Chiefs, and I'm like, I gotta walk in the other room. This is especially during the comeback.
I'm kind of funny.
I'm too competitive.
If I get a personality that I really like, like Patrick Mahomes,
Yeah.
Kansas City quarterback, I liked him when I saw him.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, the guy looks like genius to me.
You like
the first
play-
time I saw him, I thought, this guy's amazing. He looks like he's, kind of like the Tom Brady effect, where he's, and then to find out he's
just
a Christian.
captivating. Yeah.
He's a Christian. So it's like, I love him.
How Steph Curry was too. It was like,
Yeah.
what is this guy doing? Guys that change the game, they do something either way better than everybody else, or they're inventing something. Basically,
Yeah.
I mean, that was what you feel like with Curry, where it was like the dude shatters a 3-point record, and then the next season he shatters his own.
So
3-point
I'm
record.
liable
Oh my
to
goodness.
follow a team because of a
Players.
Steph Curry or Patrick Mahomes forever because
Okay.
I like them.
Yeah.
It's weird. I know it's weird.
So your allegiances are more with players than teams. Now,
like
you are
Madison Bumgarner on the Giants. I mean, he had me just. I'm going to watch every game he's pitching. I don't care, Giants winner. I just want to see him because
See,
he was
I have
so
a theory
phenomenal.
that Madison Bumgarner being in Arizona now is the reason why there's no baseball. I think that's the theory. Something's not right. We're not going to play now. Bumgarner's not in the Giants. I think we need to sit this one out, guys. So yes, that was sports teams. We've been to a Giants game a couple times together and stuff. So you're a Giants fan because of Bumgarner, or are you a Giants fan?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Giants fan because I grew up with that. My
Okay.
dad, great memory was going to Giants games
Yeah.
as a kid. Double headers.
Were you at the old state, not Candlestick, but the what was it, the Polo Grounds?
No, not the Polo Grounds. It would have been Candlestick.
Candlestick, okay.
And they used to have double headers back then.
Yeah.
Where you would
Oh,
go,
I've been to doubleheaders. They were
Yeah.
still double. We'd go, pay $1 to sit in the bleachers at Candlestick or whatever
pack
it was.
a lunch.
Pack a lunch,
and you
sit
had
out
your
there,
cooler.
watch a couple fights.
Oh
Great.
yeah, the grandstands.
Dream car,
Dream car.
or do you have it?
I have an F-150 truck, and I forget who I was telling. Maybe it was John, or was it? Maybe
I think you were in here. You were
was
talking
I
about
talking
it.
about how nice it is to have a truck.
Yes, you were talking about it with John in here when we did one of the podcasts.
And it's not
and
a
here I am
beater.
in my little Fusion.
Yeah. So
Hey, what's your gas mileage?
yeah.
my hybrid gives me 48.
So I don't really have a dream car. I have to. Maybe that makes me a little boring, doesn't it? But I really love I really love having a truck. I love going to the dumps.
Yeah.
And you can go to the dumps in your own truck.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I mean, you get rid of some stuff or clippings or whatever, and then you load it up and you go as a man and back in your F-150 truck.
My first vehicle was a Chevy, a 92 Chevy, and I loved it. And a year after I got it, well, we'd had it, but when I got my license, it became my truck. And a year after I got my license, middle of the night, someone stole it, and I walked out for school the next morning, and I was like, "Where's my truck at?" And then I look in the back and see if I parked in the back alley. Wasn't there, and I'm like, "Dad, did you leave the truck at the church or something?" No. I walk out, and there's the glass, and I'm like, "Oh shoot!"
Oh man!
And they found it a couple hours later, completely torched in an orchard. And they come over and they're like, "When's the last time you drove your car?" Trying to make sure we didn't do it for insurance money. I'm like, I loved that truck. I wouldn't have ever done it.
Right.
So yeah, I miss having a truck, and now it's been cars, and you always.
You're a family guy. You have two young kids.
Two young kids.
Your time will come. Golf and a truck.
You know what?
It's in your future.
John's a family guy, and he's got kids.
Yeah, how do you do that?
He made it happen. Well, they've got that. They've got the family car. I guess that's how it works, right?
Yeah, get that for the family.
Cool, man. Well, that was my rapid fire questions. Anything else you feel like people should know about you?
Just that I'd really like to get to know them.
Yeah.
I really would love to hear their story. People are so interesting. I mean, there's every story. I mean, I've shared a little bit of mine, but every story is so amazing. And I wish and maybe that's going to be one of the things we appreciate about heaven. We'll have time to sit down and we won't be so busy or shelter in place.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, thanks for doing this. I think it's going to be really cool for some people to get to know you a little better. Some of these things that I didn't know. I've known you for a few years now. I'm sure that some of the other staff that you raised, one of them,
yes.
They probably know all these things. But hopefully this was encouraging to you guys to hear a little bit about Pastor Bret's story. And we look forward to everything we've got coming in the future on the podcast. Pastor Bret will come through and do some sermon recaps and some other things. We'll keep him around. We know you guys like him, so we'll make sure he comes back. Anyways, this is right now. We're at Good Friday. By the time you hear this, it'll be after Easter, so I hope you enjoyed Easter. We were so excited about it, worked hard on it, and hope you were encouraged by it and were able to share it with you. So, all right, we'll catch you guys next time.